All right, hello everyone. My name is Sarah Turner with the Customer Success Department, and your presenter today is my colleague Daryl Favreau with our Client Services team. Daryl brings over 10 years of experience training Spreadsheet Server and is an excellent resource for us today. We will be presenting part 2 of our Back to Basics course for Query Designer. Firstly, I want to mention the customer portal that is accessible through our website. If you have not created a login for the portal, your customer success rep can provide that, or you can reach out to our help desk and they can assist you. But we will be posting a recording of this webinar to the portal, and you can also find previously recorded webinars and a lot of other great resources out there. So be sure you guys are checking that out and taking advantage of it. Daryl has a great presentation for you all today, and we will be expanding on the topics highlighted here, focusing primarily on leveraging the GEXD formula. This is more advanced for a Query Designer session, so certainly if you have questions, jot those down, and we will try our best to answer those. Due to the amount of material we're going to be covering, I ask you to submit questions through the Q&A box located in the bottom right of your screen. We will plan on addressing the questions once Daryl finishes his presentation. If there's any questions we don't get to, we will plan on following up after the webinar. Either your customer success representative or Daryl will reach out and make sure we get any questions answered. But at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Daryl.
Thank you, Sarah. As Sarah mentioned, today we're going to be discussing the GEXD formula and many of the functions and features that go with that formula, and additionally some advanced Query Designer functionality that we'll incorporate with the formula. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and you should be able to see Microsoft Excel at this time. So again, we are a Microsoft Excel add-in. Everything we do is primarily within Excel, with the exception of the query building that we do within Query Designer. So with the GEXD, it is one of the available formulas with Spreadsheet Server. I've launched my build a template, and as you can see, the GEXD shows up here, and it inserts the detailed results of a query into your spreadsheet. So at this point, we make the assumption that the query has been built, and I'm getting the results of that query that would help in building the reporting needs that I have. So first step is we need to bring in the query that we would like to use with the GEXD. We do that with the file folder here. And again, by opening that file folder, we're going to the location where all of our queries reside. This is the default, generally a network location. I'll select the query that I would like to use and do open. And now, as in the build a template, we have this line that runs through the center of the screen. Below the line represents the insertion of the formula and its parameters. So in this case, we're going to insert a GEXD, and we're going to have 2 parameters, a country and an order date that's going to go in with this formula. We're going to insert this formula into Sheet 1, starting column A1. Why A1? Because that's where I launched the build a template. It was the cell that I was actively on. You can always come in and alter that cell. The radio buttons to the right, I'm not going to clear the sheet as though I launched it on a blank sheet. There's no need to clear or modify the sheet in any way. You'll notice also this text here that says formula. This is just text that will get inserted with the formula. I'll highlight that text again once we do the insertion. To start off with this query and inserting the formula, I'm going to do some very basic changes here to the formula to get the detail in so I can then begin the full build and modification of how I want my report to look. So in my case, I'm going to say I want my data to go to Sheet 1 when executed. I want the starting column to be A10. And I'm going to include my headings and auto-fit the sheet. So again, all the information that I'm going to process here is due to the first insertion. Now, I'm going to also touch on this clear range of cells. We're going to talk about this cell for the next couple of minutes and a variety of these other checkboxes, such as the headings and the auto-fit. But I am inserting my data to a cell. So when I insert to a cell, I can clear a range of cells. I do not want to check this box, clear sheet range cell. Because I'm doing a cell will clear the sheet. In my case, my formula and my results will reside on the same sheet, and I don't want to clear that data. So in this clear range of cells, I'm going to say I'd like to clear cells A10, colon, and then I have to decipher, well, how many columns of data am I going to have? How many rows of data will I have? In my case, I really don't know, so I'm going to say I'm going to clear column Z, 10,000. I figure I won't have more than 26 columns, and I won't have more than 10,000 rows. So that's going to be my first set of clearing. These are all the parameters I'm going to change at this time, and I'll insert my formula. So you'll notice now I have the formula. There's that text formula that I previously mentioned. It is just text. I could replace it. I could type over it. I could do whatever information within this sheet that I want, as long as I stay outside of the realm of A10 down, because that's where my data is going to go. When I inserted, my formula, as you can see here when I click on it, represents the cells that are used for parameters. We saw that when we were in the build template. I can change these parameters, and I can then re-execute my formula. So for my first execution, I'm just going to leave it at a country of France, and I'm going to leave it at a date range of January 1st, 2006 through May of 2006. And again, I'm using some data from the Northwind database. I have a couple of options to execute my formula. My first option is I can just click the top half of this button. Bottom left corner said it was executing, and now you'll notice I've gotten the data, and it starts in cell A10. That's where I told my formula to insert my data. So now I'm going to move this formula out of the way. One of the reasons why, I told my formula to auto-fit my columns. Well, this order date column is pretty wide. So I'm going to just cut and move that formula out of the way. And then I'm going to auto-fit that column back to where I like it. And then I'm going to look at my data and make some additional changes. Any formatting that I change the next time I execute will hold true. So in this case, I'm going to reformat my order date as a short date. I'm going to format my extended price as currency, and I'm going to leave my decimal points. So in this case, I've made some changes. I've updated my information. I'm going to change my country and regenerate that report. Again, I'm just going to use the button. So you'll notice now my dates have stuck. So next time I modify my formula, I'll be able to uncheck auto fit columns, because then it'll fit the way it already is, and I'm happy and content with that. An additional change I can do is I can change the formatting of my headings. So in my case, I'm going to do an underline and a bold. I'm going to add a space in here between these values, this text that we're displaying. And so I've made two changes. I've adjusted the column width, and I've formatted some columns. An additional change I'd like to make is I'd like to auto-sum this information. So every time it runs, I get a summation down here. So I'm going to click the auto-sum function, and I have a sum. So with those simple changes, I'm going to go to my formula, and with Build a Template, we insert the formula and the parameters. With Formula Assistant, we modify the formula. So here, my cell references are there for my parameters. They're no longer values. And we lose that line because the formula already exists. And when we do our insert, it knows where to insert that information. So I'm going to uncheck auto fit. I'm going to leave that clear range of cells there. And I'm going to insert that formula one more time. I'm going to change my country. And I'm going to generate my report. So my heading stayed, my formatting stayed. I lost my subtotal. I lost my subtotal because I was telling my formula, and we can see that right here in the formula bar, to clear all the way to column Z, row 10,000. So that range of cells of A10 across to Z is going to get cleared. So with that, I've made some changes, but I'm not truly happy with those changes. So I'm going to make a couple of more changes to modify, to hold true some of my information. Now we're going to get back to that subtotaling in a moment, but some of the changes I'm going to make is I'm going to move my headings out of the data. So I'm just going to copy them in the row and paste them in the row above. I've applied that formatting and I like it and I want to keep it. So I'm going to go back to my formula, do a formula assistant, and uncheck to include headings. I'm still sending my data to A10. I'm still clearing the same ranges of cells. So to show you that change, I'm going to change my country one more time and generate. This time, to execute my formula, I'm going to select the formula itself. Go to the bottom half of the Generate Reports button, and I can execute this formula by itself. Now that execution by itself comes in handy when I have a workbook that has multiple GEXDs within it. And I don't want to run all of them at once by clicking the top half of the Generate Reports button. I can run one at a time. So in this case, I'll rerun this one. Now you'll notice my formatting here kind of held over from the last time I ran. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and do a paste special so that holds true for the next time I do run. So another issue I have here is I want to add additional data to this formula when I execute. So I want to add some data to the right here. And this is going to be a simple Excel formula. It's going to be the city with a comma and then the country. So I want to put in an Excel concat formula. So I'm just going to go ahead and do equal the city, ampersand, double quotes because we're going to do some text here by adding a comma and a space, double quote again to close that text, an ampersand to do the concatenation, and then I'm going to select the cell for the country. And there's my concatenation. So this formula is just a basic Excel formula. It could have many different purposes, but mine is a simple concatenate function. Now, human nature is to double-click that bottom and just autofill. But I want my formula to autofill that data with every execution. So if I go to Spreadsheet Server, Formula Assistant, and this field right here called Fill Down. When my formula executes, it knows it's sending data column A through column F based on the query that is being executed. I'm telling this with the fill down column that I have one additional column to be filled down. In this case, this is my concat formula. I'll do an insert, and I've created a situation for myself. If I clear a range of cells, A10 through Z10,000, I will end up clearing my formula. Well, I don't want that to happen. So I'm not going to clear A10, I'm going to clear A11. So by clearing A11, my formula will still be there for my next run. So I'll change my country, and then I'm going to select and generate again this single. And you'll notice my data filled down and my formula held. But I run a risk. If I put in a country, if I can spell, if I put in a country that doesn't have any data, I end up with a residual record. So I run the risk that if I'm running pivot tables or sharing this data with others, that I could be leaving residual information that I don't want the users to have to deal with. So that brings us into the need for using the named ranges in Excel. So I'm going to go to this cell here, where the first cell, which is A10, where I want my data to go, and I'm going to name that cell. By simply going into the name box at the top, I can name this cell. So I'm just going to call this query. Hitting enter, that cell takes effect. If I go back to my formula and do Formula Assistant, I have several changes that I need to make here, and we're going to talk through each of those now. The first change, my starting cell is no longer a cell, it's a range. So I'm going to type in the name of that range that I just gave. Now, it's going to always put the data, the text that you type in uppercase. So just be aware. And now I don't want to clear that range of cells anymore. I want to do a clear sheet range table. So at this point, it's going to clear the range. So going back to these two fields, they do coexist here together and they interact. When I do a starting cell, if I check this box, I'm going to clear a sheet. If I do a starting range, I will end up clearing the range. And supplementally, if I do a starting table, it will clear the table. By checking this box, you'll notice it cleared the clear a range of cells box. So with that being said, I can now go back, insert my formula, put in my valid country, generate my reports, and I get my data. Now, with us doing ranges, the first time we generate, there is some residual that the fill downs doesn't work. But the second and each supplemental generation, the fill downs will continue to function. So I can change that one more time, regenerate, and you'll notice my data auto-fills. So taking you back to the name range, if I come back to the name box and I choose the range in which I created, query, you'll notice my data, the content of the query, consumes the whole range. The benefits of using ranges are the data will expand the number of columns and the number of rows when executed, so that you always, the data being delivered is always consuming the full range and will always collapse and go away and bring in fresh data. So if I come up here and put in an incorrect country and generate, I don't get that residual record any longer. But you'll notice my fill down column is still there, but I don't get any residual information. So this is very beneficial whenever you want to put in data and return results. With that being said, if I put an Excel formula, in this case my sum outside of that range, and then generate that report again with a different country, the data automatically updates and the range moves with it. An example of that here is when I changed the sum, by including the blank row below the data, will always move with the data. So in this case, I'll go ahead and create a larger sum of data. And when I generate, I receive the more records, and that sum moves with it. And again, it's because the sum includes the blank row outside of the range, which will always push that sum down. So when we modify our formula, again, we use that formula assistant. And our fill down columns with ranges continue to function. Additional functionality that we can do here is I can create as many fill down columns as I choose. I'm going to add an additional fill down column here and go to 2. I'm going to expand this column here a little bit and add a formula. And it's just going to be a diff in dates. So right here, I'm going to put an Excel formula in. And I'm just going to go equal to that date plus 10. So it gives me 10 days. When I generate, that fill down column auto-fills that Excel-based formula. So I have a variety of functionality I can do to the right of the data that I'm sending. I can put in other spreadsheet server formulas. Those of you that are aware of the GEXQ, I can do that as a fill down. I can also use the GEXI and put that as a fill down. So you have a variety of fill down columns that are available and a lot of functionality with fill down columns that you can do. And by using ranges, you have the ability to send your data and include sums. Now I'm going to add a new sheet here, and I'm going to go ahead and build a template one more time, and we're going to do a second formula. This formula, I'm going to choose to use the same identical query that I had before, and I'm just going to put in some information to build it out. and then I'm going to generate my report. And I've decided I want to send my data to a table. I can highlight my data, go to Insert, and choose Table. You'll notice it consumes the data that I had highlighted as in the cell references. My table has headings, which happen to be in row 10. Do an OK, and now my data shows up in a table. I can then do the formatting and all that I had been doing. Now I'm going to move this formula out of the way one more time, and I'm going to format this column here as a short date, and we'll format this as a number. So now we're sending our data to a table. We can send our data to the table. We're going to modify that now so it does send that to the table. I'm going to select the table itself and go to the design here, the table design. And I can see my table just happens to be called Table 1. If I chose, I could rename that. So I'm just going to use that name, Table 1. I'm going to select my formula, my GEXD. I'm going to go to the Spreadsheet server and do Formula Assistant. And from the Formula Assistant now, I am going to change the starting cell from A10 to Table 1. And I'm going to check this box to clear the table. I'll insert that change. I'm going to open the date range here and just say, hey, I want all dates for the country USA. Now within my workbook, I have the ability to run 2 GEXDs, one on sheet 1, one on sheet 2. I have 2 options to run an individual. I showed you a moment ago to use the bottom half of the Generate Reports button. But if you're also on a formula, you can right-click on that formula, choose Spreadsheet Server, and the very last selection will be Generate this detail report, GEXD. By generating that, now I have expanded the execution. The benefit of sending the data to a table is that I can always come to my table, go back to Design, and check the box to include totals, and now I do have totals already included. Another benefit of sending data to tables is filters are already built in. So if I wanted to run and do filtering on my data, I have that flexibility, and it's pre-built and predefined within the query, within the output itself. Another benefit of going to tables or ranges is you can always build a pivot table off of the range or table name directly. That way, as the data expands and collapses, the pivot table will automatically adjust to execute that information. So now I'm going to move on to a little more advanced functionality. With the GEXD, we already learned that we can do fill-down columns. So the fill-down columns always have to be to the right of the data that is being outputted. So in this case, my data comes to F. I have 2 additional fill-down columns. But I've decided I need, for my reporting purposes, this date to be right here after the order date. I'm going to insert a new column here, sort of a placeholder to hold that information. So after inserting that column, this is where I want that diff date to go. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup here. After I insert that information, I need to change the formatting. I'm going to format this as a short date. I'm going to format the extended price. So I'm going to format the order date as text. I'm just doing some cleanup and some prep. The extended price will again be currency. And so I'm prepared now to talk about how do I get this value to show up. Now the value we're going to use is we're going to actually just use this date formula that we have here, which is adding 10 days to the existing date, in that case the order date. So I'm going to go ahead and just highlight and copy that formula. Now I happen to know the query name that I'm using here. So I'm going to go to Query Designer. This is the query that I'm going to be utilizing. And with that, I'm going to add a new field into my query. And again, those of you who have seen the other earlier classes, you know we can add calculated fields by right-clicking We get the builder window, and I paste that formula in here. This formula is what the query is going to pass when it executes and inserts that information into Excel. For it to function within the query itself, we have to wrap the formula in single quotes. We have to tell the query that this is text. As part of the query, it is text, but once it gets in Excel and it lays that in, Excel will identify it as a formula and calculate. So, as inserting the formula, this formula will only work for row 10. The reason why it would only work for row 10 because it's saying the cell reference is D10. I want this to be dynamic, very similar to the fill down column, in that the row number adjusts when I insert it. So Spreadsheet Server offers a tool to do that. A function here on the miscellaneous tab says get GEXD row. So I'm going to delete the 10, click this button, and it puts this text in place for us. Equal GEXD, so equal D percent GEXD row percent plus 10. So it's going to pass, when inserted, the row in which it's passing the information to. So if I have 500 rows, and on the 49th row of the 500, instead of D10, it will put 49. At this point, I've done everything I need to do. I'm going to go ahead and do an OK. Our new field is still called expression 1, but I'm going to execute this for 1,000 records so you can take a look at it. It's text. When we execute it, it put it in as text. So this is how Query Designer will handle that. So if I close the Query Designer, the results, I placed the field where I want it, which is after order date, and I'm going to give it an alias, and that alias we've been using is diff date. And again, if I execute for 1,000, you'll see now it's now embedded into the center. If I close my results and save my query, I'm ready to utilize this in Excel. I'm going to go to Excel. I've already done the prep work for that information to come through. Before I can execute my formula, I need to do two things. Number one, from the Spreadsheet Server ribbon, because I made a change in Query Designer while Excel was up and active, I need to refresh my queries. So clicking the bottom half of the refresh button, queries, I have now refreshed. And now I'm ready to generate. Before I generate, I happen to know that my query name changed. So I'm going to go ahead and put in that name change. Now I want you to make note here. I went directly into the formula itself without going into a formula assistant. As you become more advanced with the formulas and understand where the certain attributes of the formula reside, you can comfortably go in and change that information here. So I'm going to go ahead and change that formula, and now I'm ready to generate this one formula. Again, I'm going to right-click, Spreadsheet Server, generate this detail report, and now I have executed. There's my diff date. That's not my diff date. That's the date that should have came through. Let me confirm that I did save the right formula. I did not save the right formula. We're going to go here and add some more text under that. And now we're ready to execute. I'll generate my report, and now I'm getting the data that I did expect. So using the correct query does help. So here you can see that formula has been embedded. First row, A10, cell reference is correct. When I go to row 17, again, it is correct. So to recap that function, if I add a field, a calculated field, I can pass a formula, an Excel-based formula. And if I use this get row function, it will pass the correct value into the formula so that when I go back to Excel and I execute, the information shows up. I can again change my country, regenerate my formula. Because I am clearing data, the information is cleared and passed accurately. When I click the top half of this button, both formulas on sheet 1 and sheet 2 have changed. Now I'm going to share with you a gotcha. Many users do this without knowing that they are making changes to their given formulas. Sometimes spreadsheet server formulas do not interact in the same fashion that Excel-based formulas do. I'm going to rename my sheet. Just going to give it my name. My formula, if I do Formula Assistant, you'll notice it's still looking for sheet 1. The formula does not automatically update the parameters within. So I have to manually make that change. My formula is back to normal at this point. I'll repeat that from the sheet 2. You can see here, I'm cell referencing, I'm looking for sheet 2. If I rename the sheet, my formula did not update. But because I'm aware of how that's the structure of this formula, I can go in and make that change. And then, of course, I'm ready to right-click and generate that report one more time. So that is a big gotcha. We do get a lot of calls here at the help desk in regards to that. So I would recommend that when you're building out your report, before you're ready to share it, kind of play through some of that functionality to make sure that you're passing the right information so that when your users receive the data, it can accurately be received. Okay. I'm going to go back here and I'm going to talk about some additional functionality within the Query Designer. So the query that I've been building, I have the ability to come in here and do a limit on the number of rows my GEXD will execute. A business scenario for this is you're building a sales report and you want to know who are the top 5 buyers. If you sort that data by the dollar amount and you come to this field and you type in a 5, you are now going to limit the output of your data to 5 rows in Excel. Now I want to take away that. In Excel, I run, and of course I'm getting 122 rows. But if I save my query and go back to Excel and refresh my queries, this is the query that was built and using that. I spreadsheet server, generate this detailed report, and I only get the 5 rows. So again, that GEXD allows the user to set the limit. Now, some advanced functionality around this limit field. An example of that might be, I'm going to add a parameter, limit, and I'm going to call it GEXD limit. My test value, I'm going to put in as 5. I'll go ahead and do an OK. And I did that by adding the plus up here at the top right. If I come here to the GEXD limit field and put ampersand SPARMO3, Y03, because this is ID number 3, which is the GEXD limit, my user has the ability to change that in Excel. So we're going to go back to Excel here. I'm going to add a new field, GEXD limit, and I'm going to put a value of 10 in there. I'm going to modify my formula because I now have a new parameter. First, I'm going to refresh my queries, Formula Assistant, and there's that new field, the new parameter. So I'm going to cell reference. In this case, it's going to be F2, and I'm going to anchor that absolute because it's never going to move from that location. And now my user has the ability to define how many rows they choose. So by simply selecting it and regenerating, I am defining how many rows will be returned. So again, a good use for this is you're doing top 10 reports, bottom 10 reports, top 5 performers, whatever those cases may be, for you to put in those reports that you want to limit the number of rows, you simply can put that parameter in there. If you say, I want all rows, you can simply use that simple Excel star, that star with the formula, and generate that report, and then I'm going to get all my rows. So that limit can come into handy if you choose to limit the number of records that you're going to run for. Okay, we're going to move on now to a different topic here. We're still going to stay on that GEXD, but a little different approach. All spreadsheet server formulas give you the ability to drill down. So if I have a GEXD and I know that my execution can take 2 to 3, 30 seconds to execute, and I really don't want to run it, I just kind of want to look at some information, I can always go to the GEXD formula. While actively on the formula, I can click the top half of the drill down, which will bring the panel. It's the exact same data I would see in the output, but it's in the panel. Now in this situation, we do have a fill down, a column that's being shown here, so it's a little different blend of information, but I can always do that drill down. Again, it's available from the spreadsheet server right-click drill down. So again, drill down, it's the default. The default for me is to go to panel. But I also have the ability to come to the bottom half of the drill down button, hover over drill down, hover over worksheet, and click results, and it will send my data to another sheet. In this case, I drilled down from cell J1, which happened to be on the sheet by my name. I can click on that and it will take me back. So I can always do a drill down to worksheet to get that data. You'll notice here, when I did the drill down to worksheet, the Excel formula for that diff date functioned. Again, when it inserted that data, it knew to include the rows in the formula, which allowed me to load that data. So with that GEXD, you have the flexibility to do drill downs. While actively on the formula, you can either do a drill down to panel or worksheet. At this time, I'd like to open things up for questions. Sarah, are there any good questions out there that we would like to share?
The first question I have is inserting a column in a table the same as inserting a column in a cell range?
So inserting a column, I'm going to make an assumption that's very similar to what we're doing here. So if taking that, if I'm thinking of this diff date function that we did here, I'm using a query called query1_1_build. I'm going to come here and use that exact same query. So query1_1_build. And when I generate, at some point here, when I generate the report, my table did not update here. Did I misspell it? The takeaway is no, it should be identical to the execution when I do the insertion of the column as we did here, or the fill down column. They both should function the same.
Could you explain the difference between drill down and execution? So a follow-up to that is what is happening within the database?
So when you execute, you are always executing the underlying query that was written. So when you drill down or execute the query, you're still sending a query to the host database to get your results. So the behind-the-scenes functionality of sending a query and receiving the data is the same. The functionality within Excel that Spreadsheet Server carries forward will determine, based on the function you did, is how it's going to display that data. So it is very similar. The difference here is when you execute the formula, you have the flexibility to define the formatting and the output. When you drill down to worksheet or to panel, you don't have that flexibility to define how you want that data to come through. So an example, if I wanted to format this column to not include decimals, I don't have that flexibility when I do the drill down to worksheet that I do have when I execute. So the difference is you lose your functionality formatting.
All right. The next question is, can you do a GEXD limit, for instance, greater than 100,000 instead of a number of rows?
Can I limit it by the, you would have to pass it as a range in that situation. So you would want row 0 through, meaning a decimal, so 0.1000 or 0.100,000. That would be the value you would pass in your limit. So that would look very similar to this. I want 0 records through 100,000 records. And so then at that point on execution, it would count the number of rows and it would return just that number. I'll generate that now, and you can see here I received all my records. In this case, again, it's by a date range here.
All right. Can you explain the difference between an asterisk and a blank in a parameter field?
An asterisk and a blank. In queries, asterisks and blanks are the same thing. If I leave a field blank, in this case, my date field, and I'm just going to go ahead and put this back to 100 records. If I leave this as a blank and generate my report, I'm going to get all my records. If I leave it as an asterisk, I'm going to also get all of my records. So the asterisk and the blank, when it comes to queries, function the same. They both mean all. I recommend using the asterisk.
The next question, what are some good techniques for using tables with GEXD queries? This user has had to rebuild spreadsheets because oftentimes the number of records is too many and it takes a long time for the report to update.
We'll chat a moment here about tables and then I'll kind of answer that question. Tables themselves, just by the nature of what can happen within a table, an example, headings with filters, and then of course at the bottom you can have totals and you can add averages, min, maxes, and do all that. The overhead with managing a table is a little greater. So if I'm using large, and again I'm going to use the word large, over 100,000 records, over, I would even go say maybe over 50,000 records, I really wouldn't want to put that data into a table. I'd probably want to drop that data into a range or even a cell, because the overhead with managing a table that large really takes up a lot of memory in Excel. So I'd limit myself with very large volumes of data to ranges and or cells, and smaller data sets under 5,000 would typically go into a table. You can always send your data to a range and add the filters to the headings so that you can apply the filters to sort through the data a little better. Okay, did that answer that question? Was it complete? Sarah, can you kind of clarify that for me?
I think so. That question came from Vicki, and if you have any, additional feedback or a follow-up question, just feel free to either reach out to me. I'll be posting our emails at the end of the presentation, and you can follow up with one of your representatives, and we'll get back with you. The next question is about using our profile scheduler. Is there a way to schedule a GEXD to fire off on a schedule?
The short answer to that is yes. Now, without going into a lot of discussion here, I'm going to go to Distribution Manager, and I'm just going to do a Maintain Specs to get this panel up so we can talk about it. If you build a distribution within your workbook, and in that distribution you check this box down here on the bottom right, Generate GEXDs, when you run the distribution, the GEXD will execute. And you can schedule with Profile Scheduler your distributions. That's one method to execute a GEXD on a schedule. Another method would be writing a macro, an Excel-based macro, and at the startup of the Excel workbook, you apply that macro. So when the book itself opens, you go through some basic functionalities, hey, tell it to calculate, and then you pass as part of that macro the spreadsheet server GEXD command, which we do supply to you. If you have any questions for that, please reach out to us. We do supply those commands, so you can then say, open the book, calculate the book, execute the GEXD, and then save. And then you can schedule that book to run as part of the profile scheduler. So if you have more details and more questions on that, feel free to send us an email. I can kind of walk you through that. In the near future, we're going to do a profile scheduler back to the basics. So hopefully we can cover some of that, and I will include that as part of that discussion.
Perfect. Do you mind showing us the error you get if you change the sheet name in Excel but forget to change it in your GEXD?
Yes, I can. So right here, my formula currently says the sheet name is Daryl. I'm going to rename Daryl to by. When I execute my formula, and I'm going to just run this one by itself, the formula fails to kick off because it never found the sheet it was supposed to insert the data in. So it's sort of a non-error error, but there is a true error behind it. And if I click the Generate Reports button, you saw it generated and it actually ran these. So let me change some countries here. I'll change that country to France. There's nothing on there. And I'll also, here on this sheet, I'll change it to France also. And because when I generate reports here, clicking this button will run for all, you'll notice this sheet didn't change, but this sheet didn't change. Oh, it's because I changed the queries. My bad. I set myself up for failure here. Let's go back here, and I'm going to change that back to this and generate, and I've broken everything. Let's take a quick gander here and see what's going on. This is going to table 1, clearing the table, clicking headings. That all looks correct. Oh, I know what happened here. I lost my cell references. And I'll just generate this one by itself to see that it does run. Okay, so it does run. I'll change the country there, and I'll change it here. And I'll click Generate Reports, and you'll notice this one failed to run, and this one did not run again. Why not? I think this one is failing because the other one failed also. You'll notice that this one. So when it ran into that error, the second one ceased to function. So there is no error message whenever you fail to do that. The formula just ceases to function. So at that point, you would need to go into Formula Assistant and check each one of your parameters to verify what you tend to execute, whether it's accurate or not. And there you go.
This is a quick question. When using the asterisk versus blank, is that just for smart parameters and not regular parameters? Or can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, within Query Designer, you do have the flexibility of using, in this case, you can see right here in my criteria 1, you can use smart params. But you can also use parameters that are not smart. And again, that is some more advanced functionality. If the parameter is not smart, blanks or asterisks would not function. So specifically, the asterisk is only available for smart params. So when I say that, and the reason I had to clarify is because I don't want you to confuse smart params with segment values that you might use for a GXL formula or other formulas. So again, when we're strictly talking about queries, you have the ability to use blanks or stars as long as the parameter is smart. And there's going to be some future sessions on the difference between parameters being smart and not smart. And so we'll cover those at that time. But again, if it's Smart Parm, you can use the star, and the results of a star and a blank are the same.
All right. This last question is more of a licensing question. So for someone who would like to be able to leverage a query but maybe doesn't have a query designer license, is that something that they execute in Excel? And the answer to that is absolutely. So the query designer is part of our platinum level license. It's our highest license level. So it's where you're designing queries. Once those queries are written, they can be shared for gold users or even just query users within Excel to be able to use that leverage within Excel and drill down and build reports. But if for instance, they needed to modify that query for whatever reason, they would have to go back to the person that has the query designer license to make any changes to the query. And this is the last question I have for you, Daryl.
Yes.
Could you speak a little bit maybe to performance? Has it been improved when clearing and populating tables with large numbers of query results versus using like a named range?
In the most current version of Spreadsheet Server, and that's going to be version 14.6, and those versions that have been out for the last, I'm going to say maybe 6 months, if that. Those versions, yes, we have seen improvements when it comes to performance and execution. Any release prior to that, those enhancements have not been made. So when you're using large volumes of data, queries can run long. They can be a little more cumbersome for execution. So with those, I would definitely recommend sending just the data to a cell, maybe on a different sheet even, not even the same sheet you're executing from. When you're using larger sets of data, you just kind of want to be able to offload that information. The volume is so high that you're going to be doing filters and other formulas to draw the data out in the way you want it. So just kind of offloading that to a cell is the best mechanism. If you're going to send a smaller sum of data, I would again say under 50,000 records, tables and ranges work really well when it comes to that. Going to tables in 14.6, we have seen improvements with sending data to tables with larger volumes of data. So again, I would say you would have to kind of, it's a little trial and error. Each site is different. The infrastructure at each organization is a little different. Additionally, I would like to kind of comment on fill down columns. Large volumes of fill down columns are adding Excel calculation to each execution of the GEXD. So in my situation here, I only had 2 fill down columns. The volume of records that I'm sending in this case was never more than really 100 records. So the volume was pretty low and the calculation speeds were pretty good. But as you get with larger sets of data, the more you add to it, the longer you could run into calc times. And so I would just caution you, when you're building these out, build them out with smaller sets of data and build yourself up to the larger sets so you kind of have an understanding of what your runtime is really going to be. Then you may want to say, well, my runtime is a little more than I would like to see it during the daytime when I'm actively working on my computer. Maybe I want to use Profile Scheduler to execute and run that. So I might recommend Profile Scheduler and scheduling for larger sets of data that you know you need to offload, especially if you're going to a table or a range. There have been situations where I have put in an Excel macro or a button, if you will, and that button's basic functionality is when executing, click the button, change the workbook to manual calc mode, execute the GEXD so the data then gets loaded, and then put the book back in auto calc mode and recalc the book so then all those formulas calculate at one time. There is some issues with Excel in that in the way it does its calculations, every time it inserts a row, it actually calculates that row, then inserts the next row, and it does actually calculate the row above and the row it just inserted. So in essence, if you're inserting 1,000 rows, row number 1 is getting calculated 1,000 times. That's the efficiency of Excel. That's in the processing of it. So when it comes to inserting formulas, sometimes that's not so efficient. So putting the book in manual mode and then opening back up to auto is a good approach.
As far as questions, Daryl, I think that pretty much wraps up the ones that have been submitted thus far. So at this time, I'm just going to go ahead and thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. So here's a list of the customer success representatives. If you do not know who your representative is, or maybe they're not listed here, you can use the Customer Success at Global Software Inc. email address, and we will certainly get back with you. Lastly, we are going to follow up today's webinar with a short survey, and there will also be some details regarding our upcoming webinars. So we are open to any feedback. Would also love to hear what you guys have. If you have any ideas on things you might like to see in upcoming webinars, go ahead and voice those, and we certainly take all of that into consideration when putting these sessions together. And then for any colleagues that maybe were not able to attend, again, this session is going to be posted to our customer portal in about 7 to 10 business days. And that's all I've got for you guys, so thanks so much for taking some time out this afternoon to take a look at Query Designer. Have a good one.